Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Jew Wanna Know podcast. Today is our last episode of the season before we pivot to Goy You Will Enjoy, which is my season dedicated to allies. On Monday, June 9th, I'm going to release a trailer for that new season so you can learn all about what to expect, what kind of guests I'm interviewing, etc. I've worked my ass off on this, so I really hope you like it, and I genuinely want your feedback on it. With that said, worry not, because we are ending our first season with a bang featuring a highly requested guest that's really popular amongst Jewish activists, Jordyn Tilchen. Jordyn is a journalist, editor, marketing professional, and SEO expert who has worked for MTV News, The New York Post, Page Six, and more. She specializes in creating viral content through strategic keyword research, headline optimization, and digital strategy. Currently, Jordyn is the Jewish and Israel vertical lead at a tech startup called Urban Legend, where she mobilizes creators to share social media campaigns that promote Jewish pride, counter misinformation, and strengthen support for Israel. She is also a leading voice against anti-Semitism on social media, recognized as one of the top 25 Zionist visionaries of 2023 by the Jerusalem Post and JNF. A CUNY Hunter College alum with a degree in media studies, Jordyn began her advocacy in 2020, using her platform to educate, respond to Jewish current events, and promote Jewish pride in an increasingly intolerant world. I have loved Jordyn's page well before she even knew who I was, and definitely well before People Jew Wanna Know even existed. She's a highly respected activist in Ginsta, and I'm so happy we got to have a heart-to-heart in this episode. I talked to Jordyn specifically about her taking a step back from social media after October 7th. At that time, she had just made Aliyah, she was living in Israel for a few months, and then October 7th happened, and it really changed everything for her. She struggled a lot in trying to live her new life in Israel while managing the stress of the war, immigration, social media, and so she ultimately decided to move back to the States, and she wasn't as active on social media at that time. I know it really wasn't an easy decision for her to move back, and she talks about all of this on the episode. Not a lot of social media people are very forthcoming about the challenges they experience online, so I really appreciated Jordyn's candor. Jordyn also gives us an inside scoop about working in media and working with Jewish activists. I challenge her a little bit over the fact that Jewish influencership, quote unquote, is very hard to actually tie to measurable positive results of any kind. Ultimately, Jordyn and I agree on that, but I think she offers a lot of really useful intel on the space that you will find interesting. Anyway, this episode feels a little bittersweet because it's the closing of a chapter in some sense. We're moving on after this. We're moving on to some goys you will enjoy. But until then, please enjoy this episode. Hey, Jordyn, welcome to People Jew Wanna Know podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited too. You are my Zionist Barbie.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
You know, that name stuck from everything in my Instagram bio is stuff that anti-Semites have said to me over the years.
But that's kind of a compliment, Zionist Barbie.
Right, exactly. I was like, that didn't hit where that anti-Semite
meant to. Yeah.
He was meant to hurt, but I was like, oh my God, you think I'm pretty?
That's hilarious. Jordyn, tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Okay, well, I grew up on Long Island in a pretty prominently Jewish area, but mostly secular Reform Jews. So not a huge emphasis on Israel. We grew up going to synagogue. We actually belonged to a conservative synagogue, even though we were more Reform, my family. And I would always hear these stories, obviously, on the high holidays. And my exposure was really the high holidays and Hebrew school when I was younger. And I got bat mitzvahed at that synagogue. And then the synagogue turned into a church. And we never belonged to a synagogue again after that. We just didn't. So in an interesting upbringing, I was surrounded by Jewish values and Jewish culture my entire life. It wasn't until I went to Israel on birthright that I understood that the stories that I heard my entire life are rooted in a truth of this land that we come from and thousands of years old. And it was like a jaw-dropping experience to step foot in Israel and to see it all come to life and to really understand that I'm not separated from this story. This is also my story. And I think that's what I learned a lot from the Israelis that were on our trip was oh no, this is just as much, just because we grow up here and we're entrenched in this reality doesn't mean that the story of Israel is any less yours than it is ours. It's the Jewish peoplehood. It belongs to all of us. And so I took a real particular interest after being exposed to Israel for the first time. But at the time, I was still working in celebrity and entertainment journalism. So I was writing a lot about the Kardashians and about TikTok stars and about a lot of things that don't matter that much in the real world, but all entertainment things nonetheless. And then I worked at a bunch of different publications. And when I was at MTV News, I was next to the social justice editor. And I started to hear things, and this was after I had gone to Israel for the first time, and I started to hear things to preface, like MTV News, the audience is like college students. So the content reflects maybe things that college students would be interested in, which is, as we're seeing now culminating on college campuses, a lot of terror.
College students are interested in terrorism.
College students
The Kardashians and terrorism, those two things in that order.
Two things in that order that they really love. And so I would hear a bunch of concerning things like in the office. And I was like, that's not true. I've been to Israel. Like I've experienced it with my own eyes. Like these are just like really egregious lies that I'm hearing. And meanwhile, I'm over here trying to write about a new song that like BB Rexa released or some bullshit like that. And I couldn't help but overhear that like nobody should ever go there. It's an apartheid state. It's this, it's that. Anyways, we all got laid off because of COVID. And then that's how I slipped into, I was so like, I don't know that I felt that I had the tools to like go to HR and explain why I was so uncomfortable at this time, or like why what the editor was saying was wrong, or why the things I heard around the office were wrong. I was just like young, sort of new to my career, didn't feel like I was armed enough to go to HR and say like, this is the problem that I'm having. How do we deal with it? Because especially at that time, it was like many years before October 7th. And I really think the HR department would have probably just looked at me like I was crazy and not done anything. But it really inspired me to arm myself with facts, because I knew I never wanted to be in that uncomfortable position again, and that I could have said something to that editor. So after we all got laid off, I started talking about these issues on social media, because like Shein put a swastika necklace up for sale on their website, and a football player posted a quote that he attributed to Hitler on his Instagram. And I was just like, the vibes are off. Like people need to know about this. And so I originally started posting just to tell my non-Jewish friends about what's happening and why their Jewish friends are starting to feel this like very uncomfortable bubbling up of anti-Semitism. And what ended up happening was my page ended up attracting a lot of young Jewish people like me who were feeling like isolated from their social spaces and confused about like people they've known and trusted their whole life sort of turning on them or arguing with them about this conflict half a world away that they maybe don't know that much about because they grew up here in the States. We sort of just ended up like on that ride together and navigating it in this weird hodgepodge community that I've put together on my Instagram. That was a total accident. This is like a long-winded answer, but now my entire career pivoted and I work in the Jewish and Israel advocacy space on social media campaigns in support of Jewish and Israel causes. And it's been fantastic. And it feels a lot more important than the Kardashians.
Fair enough. And now I think people very much look up to you as an educator. Like before, you talked about how I didn't have the right words to say, but now it's everybody else looking to you for the words. You couldn't have taken it further, a full 180 there.
I think that what helped me with that was that I had sort of like the tools in my tool belt already. I was a writer. So for me, it was just learning more and diving deeper and deeper into Jewish history and into current affairs and everything like that to make sure that I had a really well-rounded understanding of it so that I could put it into words that resonated and that were shareable and that people felt seen or heard.
Before we dive into this a little bit deeper, I have to ask, Timothee Chalamet and Kylie Jenner, yay or nay?
Nay.
Okay, I kind of think nay too, because deep in my heart, I think he needs to be with a nice Jewish girl. I actually know one that's like the right fit for him. She's blonde and Ukrainian Jewish. I don't know. She's pretty funny. Anyway, I digress.
She's you.
She's actually me. Timothee, if you're listening to People Do You Want to Know podcast.
Yeah, no, seriously, he's wasting his time with Kylie Jenner.
I can free you.
Yeah.
Something I think you have a unique perspective on is the industry of journalism. And I don't interview that many people who worked or actively work in journalism. And I wonder, the social media and news cycle and landscape has really changed, especially post-pandemic. Are you concerned, and what can we do?
I love talking about this, so I'm so glad you brought it up. Obviously, I worked in the entertainment space, and that was very intentional. I was not wanting to be around any sort of hard news, any sort of geopolitics, anything like that, because the short and simple of it is that I really wanted like a simpler life. It didn't end up working out that way because I ended up, in this realm, which is very stressful, and there's a lot that scares me about the state of the world. So to have to face it head on every day is definitely not what my intention was when I chose a career. But I did, even though I was in the entertainment space, it did give me a window into, like I said, I was next to the social justice editor. After MTV News, I went sort of towards the other side of the political spectrum, and I worked at New York Post. So I got to see like the active newsroom there, which was obviously very different, but different in a lot of ways. And I think what I gathered from all of my time, I've worked in so many different news organizations from right to left to, there's not really anything really in the center anymore. But I've worked at such a wide range of them that I think I got a really clear picture of how the media works. And it's not anything that I don't have anything great to report back. You know what I mean? I wish I could say that it is a industry that is committed to truth and unbiased news and delivering with integrity stories that maybe people don't know are happening or that get less exposure just because it's really important that they know about it. But that's not really how the news works. And whenever I talk about the media, I always make sure to talk about how ultimately, while we all need the news and we all need to have an understanding and a grasp of what's happening in the world, the media is a for-profit business. And you see that when you jump around from different news organizations that have different target audiences. It doesn't make sense for MTV News to post a nuanced explainer about like Israel's perspective on the war, because their audience are college students that are likely sitting at the encampments at Columbia, and they don't want to hear that. They want to hear the other side. So you cater to the other side because at the end of the day, that's the side that makes you money. But you see that across the political spectrum. On the right, at right-leaning organizations, you would see sort of the same thing, just like very much in the other direction. And it's because news organizations are they're providing a product, and they're providing a product to a consumer. And the consumer has a very specific profile. The person who watches CNN is not the person who watches Fox News. The person who reads the New York Post is not the person who reads MTV News. They know this. They also know and can see in real time what people are searching for. I was on the SEO team, which is search engine optimization. So I worked on optimizing the headlines to make sure that they populated high up in Google when people searched for them. So I had my finger on the pulse of what was trending at any particular moment. If it's not trending, the news organizations are like, why would we even write about it? And that doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that we're going to write about Israel and Palestine 80,000 times, and we're not going to cover South Sudan at all because nobody's searching for it. Nobody even knows that anything's happening there. So I sort of got a really clear picture of how the media works in like ugly ways, but it made me a better media consumer. It made me understand that I need to read as much as I can and use my best judgment from what I know to pull out what feels factual based on, my knowledge. But it shouldn't be that way. It's just that way because it's a for-profit model, and it's not easy for people to be media literate. Not today, because it's like there's not a single piece of news that you can read that hasn't been touched by the human hand and whatever bias that the person who wrote the story holds. And then it goes through a writer, a producer, an editor, and it also has to fit the standards of the publication and X, Y, and Z other rules that the writers have to follow. So by the time you get the story, there's a lot of like different changes, even if they're like light little language changes. They could be, we know so many times there's like language changes that actually are quite political, especially when talking about Israel-Palestine. Yeah, it ends with people getting really, really angry and up in arms and unsubscribing from the New York Times.
I think there was a time where current events dictated public interest, and now it is public interest that dictates current events. based on what you're saying, exactly what you're saying. In America, there used to be something called the Fairness Doctrine created by the FCC that began in 1949, but then Reagan repealed it in 1987, and it required newscasters and broadcasters to present contrasting views on large, important, controversial public issues so that a consumer could see both sides of an issue. And later that was repealed. And I think that the fuel to the fire was really lit later in the 2000s during the Bush-Cheney administration, because Cheney found really clever ways to exploit that and withhold certain information depending on what news publication he was speaking to. A simple example being giving more favorable information or more in-depth information to Fox News because Fox News is more amicable to Republicans, as opposed to CNN because CNN caters to Democrats. And I think after the 2000s, I would even say Obama administration onward is when we really saw the clear line in the sand, like these are the Republican outlets, these are the Democratic outlets. And now it is incredibly apparent. I mean, like, one might argue that independent, centrist outlets even still take very clear positions on certain issues. Like a critique of the free press has been that they only write about Israel in ways that the Republican Party would support in America. But I don't necessarily find that to be true. I do think the free press is quite centrist. But my point is that there's still critique even about those publications that claim to be centrist, that they're not sufficiently centrist. There's just no middle ground. News and media are no longer a source of impartiality or reality or objectivity. They're there to deliver someone's agenda. And that's really a shame. And of course, you're seeing firsthand how it impacts the Israel-Palestine conflict directly. Something that you've been forthcoming about, and I do think in some senses unique to you, is you talk about how like being an activist on social media, and these are your words, not mine, has deprived you of the joys of life, which is a very strong phrase to use. Can you tell me a little bit about how did you get to this point and what are you doing now to take care of yourself?
You know, it's interesting because I'm trying to think of when I started to feel that way, because when I started talking about these issues, I was like, oh, there's parts of it I love. Like, I do love that I have this amazing community of friends, really, especially at a time that felt so isolating over the last few years while trying to sort of convey how just the cause of Zionism is, and to get so much pushback from, you know, people who really have no horse in the race. And so for many years, I was like, this is awesome. I've built this like community and it still is awesome. And sometimes I'm like, wow, it's so weird that people like want to hear what I have to say because I'm just a girl. But then things got harder for me and actually had very little to do with the community itself. It's not like all of a sudden I resented the social media platform that I had built. It was that the entire world changed in front of my eyes and I didn't know up from down, right from left. I had no idea what world I was living in anymore. I knew anti-Semitism was bad because I had been speaking about it for so many years. But when October 7th happened, it was 4 months after I had made Aliyah. I'm sharing all of these personal decisions on my platform. So it's become, you know, it was always personal because I'm a Jew, but it became deeply personal because I became Israeli and I was in Israel on October 7th and then Israel was attacked and all I wanted was to understand. I thought I understood the world and I thought that I was armed with the tools to talk about these issues. And then October 7th happened and I was sort of like, why is anyone even listening to me at all? I didn't even know that this type of evil like existed. And what do I have to offer people now? Because I've never felt lower than I do at this moment. And for a while, I don't think I knew what to offer people. And I was trying to still navigate the personal decisions that I made to move to Israel, to make Aliyah. And then you have to deal with the bureaucracy in Israel. You have to try to build a social life for yourself in Israel. You have to try to work in Israel. And so I was navigating the difficulties of starting my life over, essentially, during the worst time in Israel's history. And also navigating being a quote unquote voice on social media for this community where people have turned to me for so many years. And now I have nothing great to say because I'm like, I'm supposed to be this person that's supposed to be lighthearted and offer some sort of like light at the end of the tunnel. I think I felt a ton of pressure. I didn't understand how to move forward as this person who I guess became sort of, you know, respected on social media as somebody who could string a few intelligent words together about the situation in the Middle East. And I didn't know where to go from there, and it drained me. And that was really what was hard. It was like I was navigating these personal decisions while also trying to understand how I could be helpful at a time where, I was devastated. I was crushed. When I came back from Israel after October 7th, I laid on my couch and I cried for a month, and I didn't leave the couch. It was the hardest time in my life because, like I said, I genuinely couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this type of evil existed. I knew there were rockets before I made Aliyah. Obviously, that's something that people sort of have to contend with if they're going to move to Israel. I'd been there during rocket sirens. I had that experience, but October 7th was something totally different. The world has me questioning everything. It's been like a journey sort of navigating like the private decisions of my life with how I balance it with my advocacy moving forward and what I want people to see. I'm pretty open, so I share everything, including like my anxiety and the mental health stuff that has sort of plagued me since October 7th, because I know that there's people that are watching me that can relate to it. I took being like an example really seriously, I think, before October 7th. And I was like, I feel like I'm an example to all these young Jewish people. Stand up for yourselves and be strong, be fearless, be like badass. And now I'm realizing that they don't really contradict each other when you're just because you're honest about your mental health. You could still be all of those things. You can still stand up for yourself. You can still stand on your values. You can still, be strongly rooted in the truth. And you can also be crushed and devastated by the state of the world at the same time.
I'll just add that the role of being a content creator is not only to create, but it's also as much, if not more, to consume. Because you can't create content out of context, which means that when you're trying to make commentary on something, you have to go on social media and look through tons of other people's posts, consume stories, consume reels. And that's traumatic in and of itself when you're managing living in a country under war and trying to figure out what you would like to do with your life. People don't understand like how much anti-Semitism content creators internalize because they're forced to consume so much social media in order to put out messaging that's relevant. And I'm not saying this is like influencers, woe is me, you guys have it so hard or whatever, but it's part of the job and people need to recognize that.
Right. And I think before I made Aliyah, it was like I was doing this all the time and consuming it, and it was hard to consume it all at the time. When I moved there, I was living it, I was consuming it, and my career pivoted. So for my 40-plus hour work week, I was consuming it. And when I stepped outside, there were hostage posters, and there were crying hostage family members, and there were friends, and I lived on Dizengoff. Down the street, there was the memorial. It was like, there really was no respite from it. I just felt like I was just like punched in the gut 8 million times. Like, you can only prepare for so much. You cannot prepare for an October 7th when you are a new citizen in a country where you have 1,000,001 things that on your checklist that you need to get done in the first few months that you're there. So it was more than just consuming it online. It was more than just scrolling. It was everywhere. And it was just deeply, deeply like damaging, again, because I had maybe even though I had been exposed to all of this stuff because I had been reading it for years, maybe even still naive as to the kind of world that I lived in. And it took, really having to experience that day to understand on a deeper level.
When you reflect back on that time and how you've handled now running your social media, figuring out how to connect with your community, is there anything you wish you did differently now that you have the hindsight?
I don't think there's anything I would do differently, because I actually think that from the very beginning of starting my social media, and starting my social media is such a loose term because it was my personal page before, and then I just ended up randomly pivoting to talking about mostly Jewish issues, but it was always really important to me to be authentic and to be myself and to be somebody online that people saw as like a friend or a sister and I always did that. And that's more important to me than anything. I never even really try to grow. Like, I don't think my platform's grown in like years. I feel like my role is to say what I feel like needs to be said, and to say it in a really concise and clear way, and to make the morally confused really embarrassed by their moral confusion, and to be direct. I feel like I've done that. And I try to still do that. And I try to use nuance where I can. And then there's also times where I'm like, I don't know, some things aren't that nuanced. You know what I mean? Like, I think like a lot of the times things are a lot simpler and we intellectualize them a lot. But at the end of the day, like there's a genocidal group of people that want to see the Jewish people completely destroyed and expelled from Israel. And there really is no nuance to that. There's nuance to the reality on the ground, of course. Everyone wants to talk through everything in a really granular fashion. And I'm like, some things we actually don't need. We actually don't need to talk about in such a granular way. Some things are just the way they are. Let's just get our morals in line. You know what I mean? And that's really what I've tried to do. Are there things I've said on my platform that I'm like, all right, maybe I should have said it differently or yeah, sure. Always. I get a slap in the ass in my DMs, so it's fine.
And now that the situation in Israel is evolving like every day, we're recording this in May. It's going to come out in a few weeks. When Jordyn and I are recording this is right around the time where people are starting to have concerns around, is Israel intentionally prolonging the war? And does Israel have any plan for after the war? Or is their goal just to take Gaza and screw the hostages? Whoever we get back, great. And if we don't, fine. That's like the narrative in the media right now, at least what I see. What I like about your page is when you post, sometimes you'll be like, I don't know what I think about this, but what I do know is X, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's comforting because people need to see that even our most educated, most competent people sometimes don't have a full opinion on something. And it's also okay. You don't have to have an opinion on every single dimension of something to know that you feel a certain way about a part of an issue or that you want our hostages home. Considering that many content creators listen to this podcast, specifically content creators who focus on Jewish issues, are there any words of advice that you have as someone who is doing this for 5 years now, if not more?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is like the authenticity. I never want to show up as like anybody I'm not. And I think that was really what shook me like around October 7th was because I didn't know what world I lived in and I didn't even know who I was anymore. I actually had thought that if there was going to be a Jewish community attacked in a really violent way, it would probably be in the diaspora. That was my inkling at the time after having observed anti-Semitism and speaking about it for so many years on social media. So for me to have gone there and then 4 months later to have woken up to the absolute disaster that was October 7th, I began to question my decision-making skills. Do I even have the ability to keep myself physically safe from harm in this world? I think there's like a personalization to it. I think the more personal things are, the more they resonate, the more authentic they are, the more they resonate. You don't have to go on social media and be like a news anchor. You can literally just tell people how you're feeling about something. You don't have to come, and I'm coming with somebody from a journalism background, and I'm like, I don't want to be a journalist on social media. That's not at all what I feel like my role is. My role is to sort of empower and inspire and strengthen the community if I can, however I can. But I don't see my role really as like coming to report straight news. I really see it more as this is what happened and this is why I feel like it's ridiculous and you need to know about it.
I gotta ask, so Urban Legend, which is the company that you work for, finds ways to compensate creators based on the impact of their messaging. So for example, they could promote, I'm just making an example up on the spot, like signing a certain petition or advocating for a certain cause, go vote. I'm just making this up. But they're compensated based on the number of engagements that content has, which seems to be like a fair system to compensate creators. And it's like a meritocracy in that sense. Within the Jewish activism space, it's very clear that people have built careers off of posting about anti-Semitism, Jewish content. They've gone on to become keynote speakers for events, charging honorariums for that. At the same time, it's not actually clear that content or messaging is aligned to any KPI or key result. Because from what I've seen, research actually shows the opposite, where the more we talk about anti-Semitism, the more anti-Semitism there is. Drawing people's attention to the negativity of anti-Semitism, maybe it's confirmation bias where like we look for it more, so we see it more. But increasingly, people are starting to talk about the fact that talking about anti-Semitism constantly continues to push anti-Semitism along because it makes it a normalized phenomenon in society. What do you see as someone who works with these content creators? The frustrations of the Jewish community are bubbling up where they're like, what are these influencers doing? Whose minds are they changing? They charge a bunch of money. Does it amount to anything? What are these galas, where people get paid $40,000 to speak and have hair and makeup funds? What do you think?
So what's interesting is I'm not involved in those one-to-one deals. So I genuinely don't know what anyone is making. What I will say is that, yes, the urban legend model is definitely a meritocracy. You have to get your followers to sign. You have to get your followers to click. You have to get your followers to take a specific action. And then creators are paid on a per action basis. So it very much is an accountable way. It's sort of a way for clients to circumvent throwing a lot of money at one influencer and hoping that there's a return on the investment without really knowing if there is. So I'll leave that there. The other thing that I wanted to say is that I don't think everybody in the online activism space serves the same role, nor do I think they should serve the same role. And I look at what I do on social media as I'm not really trying to change I understand the importance of reaching out of the echo chamber, not in theory, but in practice. I understand that is a very important thing that we must do as a community. But I am one person. And for me, the value of my page is that I know that there's girls my age or young people my age that come to my page and just feel less alone, and that I'm a friend, and that I'm this, and I'm not trying to be anything else. I'm not trying to be a journalist. I'm not trying to really do anything else but share my own personal opinions as my own personal opinions, how I'm feeling about things in the moment. But there are journalists on social media that are turning their page into journalism news pages. They all reflect a certain level of bias, naturally, but I think it depends what your role is. For others, maybe they feel their role is to reach out of the echo chamber. Maybe for people who make more viral video content in Central Park or on college campuses or wherever, where they're interacting with people outside of our community and then sharing what those interactions are like with the Jewish community. It's not only to give the Jewish community a window in, but it's also to make viral content that hopefully, expands outside of the echo chamber. I don't see that as my role, but I do see there is value. And I see that if that's how someone else feels like they are of value in the space, then sure, go ahead and do that. Everyone's role is unique. We always talk about if Hasbara is effective or not, but I also don't think all forms of Hasbara look the same. And I think that there's value in Hasbara that makes Jewish people more comfortable in their Jewish identity. And there's value in Hasbara that reaches outside of the echo chamber. And the methods for doing both those things are entirely different.
My hot take on this is if there's a piece of content you don't like or a creator who you think puts out vain messaging that's bad or harmful, don't follow them. And if every other person thought like you and took a moment to think critically, do I support this person, this content creator, then it would be a non-issue. If every Jewish organization stopped paying $40,000 to these influencers for hair and makeup funds, we wouldn't have this problem. My point is that each one of us has agency. And expressing frustration when you fail to express your own agency in the process seems a little hypocritical. So I call upon the Jewish organizations that if a creator you paid a bunch of money to isn't driving the results and isn't providing you with outcomes to justify the investment, that's on you as a Jewish organization to be more strategic about who you hire and making sure you did your due diligence about who you hired and whether their work actually results in an outcome that you want.
And I also think that this is a conversation that before October 7th was one that was very common in this online Jewish space, which was much smaller at the time because after October 7th it obviously metastasized. But before October 7th, there was a pretty, robust community of Jewish creators. And a lot of the conversation was about pressuring organizations to support young people that are doing this work really for nothing. At that time, nobody was getting everyone was scared. That's literally the motivation behind talking about anti-Semitism was that it's bubbling up. I'm uncomfortable and I need to talk about it in a public space because I actually think that talking about it and acknowledging it is I don't think it causes more anti-Semitism to talk about it. I think we should talk about our experiences and share our experiences, and especially with people who maybe don't understand that this is the reality, the lived experience of a Jew today. But it was a conversation because at that time, Jewish organizations were not investing in social media, in influencers at all. And it's sort of like you're working with a system it's like you're trying to get the best impact from an imperfect system. In a perfect world, we would have a perfect media that isn't colored with so much bias and that we could get the straight facts. But in 2025, the reality is that people trust people that they've chosen to follow on social media more than they trust the news anchor on CNN or the news anchor on Fox. They say, my politics are more similar to Jordyn's. My politics are more similar to, X, Y, and Z. They follow who they either hate or they follow who they agree with. It's a slippery, slippery, slippery slope. It's not separate from the media problem. It's very much part of the media problem. It's very much the result of media bias and the media being a for-profit business and people not knowing where to turn and needing to find somebody that they trust to tell them what's true and what's not true. And the truth is that even the people you trust to do that sometimes don't know, because understanding the news has become increasingly more difficult with the rise of activist journalists. So the state of affairs is not great. If I had my choice, that's why it's sort of even bittersweet to be a voice on social media, because I'm a lot of the time I'm I shouldn't be the voice. You know what I mean? I shouldn't have to distill these ideas to make people understand there should be a better source. They're coming to me because they don't feel that there is. And that's sad to me because I'm just a girl.
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to unwind some of these things, but I do think I feel pretty confident in this, that when there's clear development in Israel and when the war dies down, which it will, the Jewish activism space is going to shrink significantly again, because there are plenty of people in the industry who are making their careers off of a news cycle, not of a sincere desire to build educational material for Jewish people. And there's a difference. Commenting on what's going on in the news and getting people riled up about, did you hear what so-and-so said about blah, 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 is different from actually being an academic or a scholar or an educator who can provide learning materials, who can provide takeaways, actionable, vocabulary that you can use in a debate if you need to. And those are fundamentally different. So I think the space is going to shrink and shrink significantly, not to the size it was pre-October 7th, but maybe halfway there, something like that.
Yeah, I do think that you're probably right about that. It's a hot button issue right now and people are impacted by it, so they feel the need to talk about it. I don't know, but I do also foresee it shrinking.
Keep me honest here. Pre-October 7th, when all the activists and academics who were making the infographics back in the day, the OGs, who were please, Jewish nonprofits, can you pay me for this hard, laborious work I do completely for free to educate people? Can we do something together? Can we do a partnership so that I'm not, educating for free when I have a full-time job? The reason none of those things were being paid for was because nobody could come to those Jewish organizations and say, I made this infographic and as a result, XYZ. Nobody could prove that it had any benefit or value because it wasn't tied to any outcomes. And what's fascinating to me now is now there's just a lot more people doing that during the war, but still nobody can tie it to any outcomes. But I guess Jewish nonprofits don't care, because they think it will be helpful. They think it's important. I think they've evolved where they'll do paid campaigns for signing petitions or registering for certain events, buying tickets to certain events. Sure, but organizations whose KPI is reducing anti-Semitism or promoting a certain message about Israel, I want one of them to come on here and tell me how they can prove that somebody posting a static post on Instagram resulted in a reduction of anti-Semitism. It's impossible. And that's predominantly why I think it'll be so clear. The shrink will be so apparent after this war is over, because there's not going to be a justification any further to continue to funnel money into something that you can't prove amounted to anything.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you. I don't know if I have anything to add.
Well, that's why the meritocracy concept is so important. The more we can measure the performance of certain material, the better it is. And we kind of need almost like a consulting group to come in and try to tie sentiment to how this marketing or this content affects people, what results it takes, sentiment analysis. We need more advanced market research.
And I also think this is something that a lot of people, for their own interests, don't want to be figured out.
Yes, and no one has the incentive to figure it out.
No one has the incentive to figure it out. The people who were in this before, they just wanted the problem to go away. You know what I mean? Like, I think the reality is in this space that, I don't know if I would get in trouble for saying this, but you need a little bit of a problem. These organizations need a little bit of a problem to stay afloat.
That is true. It's not just organizations, it's content creators too, because you have to have something to talk about. My belief on this is that there's always something new to talk about. Kind of like, this goes back to the argument of we don't have an incentive to cure cancer because we make a lot more money from treating cancer than we do from curing it. But here's the thing, like if you find a way to cure cancer, you can move on to then cure something else that's currently uncurable. There's always more ideas, more entrepreneurship to be had, more problems to be solved. So we'll find something else, but you have to get rid of the scarcity mindset, which I think we are not past yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that this moment in time exacerbated it.
Yeah. I'm curious to know if there's something specific that you're optimistic about in this industry.
As an industry, no.
Fair.
Because I really wish it wasn't one, you know?
Yeah.
I think the industrialization of it is a little bit of a turnoff in general. But
what about as Jordyn?
I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that the war will end soon, the hostages will come home, and I know the war will end soon because wars are not perpetual and they don't last forever. But that general peace is restored in this place that we love so much, and that the next person who makes Aliyah doesn't have their maybe experience marred by such a deeply tragic event that totally pushed the world off its axis and I hope it is affirming to them. There's so much that I still obviously and always will love about Israel. And I never want anybody to get this idea that I regret making Aliyah, because I don't. I just made Aliyah at a really challenging time. And I hope that long into the future, and I'm sure it will be true, many more Jews will make Aliyah to Israel, and it will be a peaceful time, and they'll be allowed, because there's peace around them and this like incredible culture and this feeling of being like where you're supposed to be, which I know that feeling, but without all of the war and the heartache and the pain, that they can have the opportunity to like fully come into themselves in the way that like maybe was a little bit robbed from my experience because of everything that happened. So I am hopeful. I'm hopeful for the girls like me that are like, I want to go on an amazing adventure and change my life. And I know that they will. And I know many people who have since. I'm very optimistic about the future of the Jewish people because history has shown me that there's a lot to be optimistic about. We are quite incredible after all these thousands of years of continued persecution.
Amen. And how can people connect with you on social media and learn more about your work?
So I actually used to be a lot more active on Twitter than I am now. But on Twitter, it's my full name, @Jordyn Tilchen, with a Y, Jordyn. And on Instagram, it's @JTilch, JTILCH. And that's really where I keep it. I've tried TikTok before. I just can't. So we keep it to Instagram and Twitter.
I'm also convinced that half the people that follow you think your last name is Tilch.
Oh my God. I've seen people in like real life at conferences or whatever, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, Jay Litch. And I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, that's not even what it says.
Can you read?
And I'm like, this whole time they thought my last name started with Litch. So it's funny. I mean, it's so fun to see people that have interacted with me online in person at these events. That's like a very fun thing for me because like you start to realize that like, I don't know, the Jewish community is small and it's just nice that it is kind of weird though, because you're like, oh, you've been watching me for all these years and I'm just meeting you now for the first time. And I feel like I should know so much more about you because this feels like a little one-sided just because I'm so honest on social media about my life. Yeah, but it's fun. They can know so much about me and they can still think my handle is Jay Litch. It's been so many times I've been in this situation where you don't follow her, Jay Litch. And I'll be like, Jay Tilch.
Wow.
It happens a lot.
Okay, well, I have one final question for you. It's one that I ask every single guest of the podcast. Who would you like to nominate for People Jew Want to Know?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Who do you want to hear from? I'm curious. I'm always curious about the super in the loop content creators. Who is a guest that you want to hear from?
It's going to be really hard to get this guest on.
Who?
The ghost of Joan Rivers. I am like dying to know what Joan would have to say about the state of affairs these days. So good luck with that. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. The ghost of Joan Rivers.
You know what? I'll work on that.
I don't know who the publicist is and who represents the ghost of Joan Rivers, but I'll let you do your research.
Yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This was so fun.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Do Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Do Want to Know.